to be a very, very good tank indeed. And those of you who know all your tank history, we have a little bit of tendency to kaleidoscope history. We look back, judge them with the benefit of hindsight, and there is a bit of a tendency to say all the British tanks weren't very good. In actual fact, this tank coming on now, the Matilda II, was a superb tank in 1940. It frightened the Germans no end. It had got very, very thick armour. The German standard 37mm anti-tank gun could not penetrate the armour on this vehicle. And surprisingly enough, it was reading the reports of the strength of the armour of this tank. Hitler read these reports, and it was that reason that he insisted on the German army starting the Tiger program. And a lot of people often think that the Tiger was designed after the invasion of Russia, when the German army met the famous T-34 tank that we'll see a bit later on. In actual fact, Hitler starts the Tiger program in May of 1941, before they even invade Russia. He insists that the German army has a massively powerful tank. And one of those reasons is because he's read the reports of how good the British Matilda II tank was in France in 1940 and out in the North African desert against the Italians. Now this has got a larger crew, a 3-man crew. You've got a 2-pounder gun there. Now it's always very confusing when we talk about gun sizes. In Britain, we had the weight of the shell that the gun fired was used to measure the type of gun it was. So the weight of the shell that was fired from that gun. And in the early 1940s, that tank was fired around the end of the German tank at the time, which is very, very effective. It's about 40mm in size across the end of the barrel, to give you an indication. And it was a high velocity gun. The rounds came out at the end of the barrel with a tremendous amount of force behind them. This particular tank, it's painted in a scheme called the Quarter scheme. It was a scheme designed for use in the desert, and this particular tank has been painted in the markings that was used by a VC winner called Foot out in the desert. It's a rare survivor in the sense it's a rare vehicle running, and I'm so pleased it's actually made it round the track and stopped in front of you there. Now, we're going to have a look at the standard German tank coming out now of the early war period, and it's again taking you back. When Hitler comes to power in Germany in 1933, he says to the German army, when are you going to be ready to go to war? He's got his plans all lined up. And basically the German army says to him, we're going to need about 10 years to build up the army into a strong enough force. So they start in Germany from 1933 onwards, building on some secret work they've been doing before the war, or before 1933. They design a Panzer I and a Panzer II, which really turn out to be their training tanks. And it's this tank coming on now, the Panzer III, and another tank that we have inside the museum, the Panzer IV. Those are the tanks that the army was actually going to go to war in. Now, the Panzer III that you see in front of you was actually captured in North Africa by British forces and taken back to the United Kingdom for evaluation. This is an L model. With the German army, instead of going Mark I, Mark II, it's Alpha or version A, B, C, D. And this one's an L, so it's later in the production run. And again, the Germans are very clever. They design their tanks in such a manner that they can upgrade them. They can add bigger guns, they can add more armour plates. Now this particular Panzer III, it started the war with a short-barreled, medium velocity 50mm gun on. So what does all that mean? 50mm, again the size of the hole at the end of the barrel, 50mm across. Medium velocity, the rounds come out with a medium amount of force. Now as the Germans met our tanks with bigger and thicker armour plates on them, we end up, or the Germans end up, putting bigger guns on their tanks. Now this gun, it's a 50mm gun as well, but it's a high velocity, longer barrel gun. So it was put on the tanks later in the war, so it had more penetration. It could penetrate more armour when it was firing against other tanks. And you'll also notice as the vehicle drives past you, they bolted extra armour protection on the front of the vehicle. So there's more armour plate on this vehicle to give it that extra layer of protection when we were putting bigger guns like the 6-pounders on our tank. Now this particular Panzer III, it was restored by the museum some years ago. It's pretty much been kept and running order since it was captured, but it's a typical example of the tremendously good German engineering that they put into their tank design and quality engineering. Everything about this tank is made to last, and we'll see that contrasts quite considerably with how other countries approach tanks later on in the war. Panzer III has a crew of 5 in it, 3 guys in the turret, commander right in the middle. And when this tank was captured, one of the things the British report said about it, they liked the way that the tank commander was in eye-line and contact with most of the crew members inside. That means you can reassure the rest of your crew that they can see you, they've got that sense of reassurance inside, because once you're in a tank in a combat situation, obviously very, very stressful, you need that reassurance or a boot in the backside sometimes by the commander to make sure you keep doing what you're supposed to be doing in the very cramped and stressful place of the tank. Now you can see at the moment he's manoeuvring the vehicles. Tanks tend to steer, by the way. What happens, you can see, he's locking the track on one side, braking the track on one side, other side keeps going, and that's how tanks push round the corner. The only wheels that are being driven by the engine are the ones with the spokes on. They're the powered wheels on the ground that are just taking the weight of the vehicle, spreading the heavy weight of that tank out across the tracks. The wheel at the rear is just keeping that track nice and taut, so it doesn't flop off. So you pick up your track, flow it forward, bite into it, pull yourself along it, pick it up and keep going that way. Now, some of you know about tanks, you know about this one coming on now. This is the famous Russian tank called the T-34. Very distinctive package. You can hear that. That's the pin that's holding the track together being knocked back into place by a little wedge that's on the inside of the hull of the vehicle as it drives along. Now, the Russians had a very different idea to tanks. They looked at tanks a bit like we might look at a hand grenade. It's a munition. They knew it had to do a job, but let's keep it simple. The Russian order of battle, the way they were going to fight, was use as many tanks as you needed to get from A to B. Here's some more, we're going to build you some more if you run out of those ones. So they kept the design of their tanks very, very simple, and crew comfort inside this vehicle is absolutely important. But then we have to remember, of course, the Russians are a UK mission as well. If you didn't want to serve on this tank, you were on the battalion, and they tried the next time to get in the tank instead. Now, this one is actually a T-34 AC-5. They start the war with something called the T-34-76, a 76mm gun, a smaller gun, 2-man turret. This is a much larger turret put on later in the war with a bigger gun on it, an 85mm gun. And as we said, the Russian mentality is make lots and lots of tanks. They make them well, they make them very simple, so they can make a lot of them. This one's marked up as a Polish tank, and we think this one was actually made in Poland just after the war, but it's a wonderful example of that simple Russian design. Sloped armour, and if you slope armour, basically you increase the thickness of it, so that when you're firing from another tank at it, that round has to penetrate more metal, but instead of vertical armour, like you can see on the Panzer III next door, the metal it has to penetrate, if you slope it, it means it's got to go through thicker metal, and also it doesn't add more weight to the vehicle. You can keep, you've got more metal to go through rather than extra weight added to the vehicle by thicker armour protection. So that's the Russian tank that the Germans meet when they invade in 1941. The Russians already built a fair number of T-34s, and it goes on to be one of the greatest tanks, certainly, that was designed in World War II. We're going to come out now with another classic tank, the Sherman tank, which is how the Americans approached tank design in the early part of the war period. The British Army had sent some of its tank engineers out to America, and they were helping the Americans design their tanks. America had barely 300 tanks when the war began for us in 1939, but they knew they were going to be involved in the war generally. They knew it was coming. Roosevelt was basically preparing the American army behind the scenes, even when they were neutral, and they start by designing a tank called the M3 Grant tank. You can see that inside the museum. The M4 Sherman tank was the tank they were going to fight the war with. And as a vehicle, it was designed not as an infantry tank, but as one of these cruiser tanks to go and exploit the gaps that were broken in the front line and go behind the lines, causing damage. So we often wonder, why was the Sherman used against enemy tanks when it didn't seem to have a particularly powerful gun? It starts the war with a 75mm gun, not particularly thick armour. Why were we putting it up against enemy tanks? Well, actually, the Americans designed a tank destroyer that was supposed to be there to knock out the enemy tanks when we met them. But it didn't take too long for the Americans to realise you couldn't always have the right kind of tank, the right place, and the right arm. So they were finding German tanks, even though they weren't really designed for that. Now, belatedly, they upgraded the Sherman. This particular one's got a 75mm gun on. In Britain, we put the massive 17-pounder gun on, a fantastic anti-tank gun. And you can see the Fireflies that was called inside the museum. This is a late war Sherman. This particular one's got wider tracks than the early war ones. It's got a twin diesel engine in the back and that bigger 76mm gun. But a fantastically reliable tank, no two ways about it. A very, very good tank from the British point of view because the Americans were able to make so many of them, they gave us lots of them. Now, we're going to come on now to another tank, which is probably the tank you've been interested in. We're going to bring on Comet tanks to you now, which is a British tank that came out slightly later in the war, after we'd actually got to Normandy. We'd designed it earlier in the war, but with a lot of our tank designs, they took quite a while to come to fruition. There was a lot of delays in production. Now, those of you who like listening to aeroplanes and air shows, the engine in this tank is actually the same engine, pretty much, as in Spitfire. This is the Meteor engine in the back of the vehicle here. This is the Merlin engine as it was in the Spitfire. It's called the Meteor, and it finally gave us a tank engine in Britain that was really powerful. Very expensive. Now the gun they put on the Comet tank is a slightly shortened version of the 17-pounder gun. It was changed slightly, but that was a tremendously powerful anti-tank gun. Its penetration was actually greater than the Tiger's 88mm gun. So it was a very powerful gun. And the armour protection on the Comet was again very thick, only 10 centimetres at the front, which is not that dissimilar to the Tiger's. So the Comet was a good tank. Unfortunately, we only used it in anger just after January 1945, so we've only got them in service after a lot of the tank fighting in Normandy is already over. Now the Comet, you'll hear it when he's revving it, the petrol engine there, it tends to backfire and splutter a little bit. Sometimes stalled, dare I say. Now the driver's looking out of that very small hole out the front there. So his vision is actually very, very restricted looking forward. There's a little hole next to him because he's hatched, by the way, to escape from or climb into the vehicle. He's on his left-hand side, just above his head. Now, if the tank was knocked out in combat and the gun is over the top of his hatch, he won't be able to get out. So they provided the driver with a second escape route so he can get out the other side. Now, that escape route is very, very small. And I once asked a Second World War Comet veteran, how on earth have you got through that hole? And he said, fear is a great lubricant. If that vehicle was on fire, you would have found a way to getting out. Now, some of you, again, looking at the end of the barrels, the Sherman and the Comet both have muzzle brakes on the end of the barrels there. And those muzzle brakes are to capture some of the escaping gas that goes out the end of the barrel and to pull the gun forward. We all know when a gun fires, we see an old cannon fire, it goes backwards. That's a recoil. If you can capture some of the gases going forwards and help push the gun back forwards, it lessens the recoil, so the gun doesn't need such big springs or compression mechanisms inside the turret. There's a downside to those muzzle brakes. They tend to stop rounds with discarded sabots. The bits that fly off the side, they can get caught in them. So there's ups and downsides with having a muzzle brake, as they're called, on the edge of the gun. Now, the tank coming on now is, many people would probably say, one of the best tanks ever produced in the world. And it's a tank that was actually designed in Britain during the war, and we managed to get one of the first ones inside the museum is the Centurion tank. And you can see the Mark I inside. This is a much later Centurion. This is a Mark XII. And people often ask the question, when a tank goes through a lot of marks, is that because they get it wrong and they have to do something to make it better? Actually, it's quite often a sign that a tank is a very good tank. It can be improved on. And just like the Spitfire went to well over 20 marks, the Centurion went to an awful lot. It's about 13 different marks of a battle tank because we could improve on it. It starts life with a 17-pounder, then a 20-pounder gun. This one that's driving around now has got the British L7 105mm gun on. When this was put into service in the end of the 1960s, this gun, lots of countries, the Americans, the Germans, lots of other countries came and bought the gun off of Britain because it was the most effective tank killer in the world at the time. Tremendously powerful, tremendously good gun. Still got the Meteor engine in the back. It went through lots of adaptations, different models of Meteor, but the Centurion is often looked at as that superb combination that comes together at the end of World War II, when instead of having different types of tanks, such as the cruiser tank or the infantry tank, let's make one main tank or a main battle tank to perform all the roles. And tanks, as we know, they're made up of three main things: firepower, mobility, and armour protection. And the Centurion has a really good balance of those three. Fantastic firepower, fantastic mobility with that Meteor engine, and very good armour protection. And when you think of the Centurion, it went into service just after World War II. The British Army only took the last type of Centurion, the beach armoured recovery vehicle, out of service in about 2003. And there are still some countries around the world, the South Africans are still using their Centurions. It's called the Oliphant in South Africa. Doesn't look like that, they've bolted lots of armour on the outside. But a fantastically good and powerful and effective tank. Now the next tank we're going to bring on for you, this is a tank that's coming on now that was made well after World War II, but it's an interesting tank because it's controlled. Now the big tanks were the tanks of World War II, like the Tiger and the Panther and the King Tiger. go in the opposite direction. Instead of massive guns, instead of thick armour protection, they decided to go for speed. Now the Leopard tank, when it first went into service, only had armour protection against 30mm rounds, so bigger than a bullet, but not the sort of anti-tank gun size. But what the Germans did, they put a tremendously powerful, you can hear it there, MTU diesel in the back of their vehicle, and they made that vehicle very, very fast, and speed became its protection. So what they were saying is if we drive fast enough around the battlefield, the enemy tank guns won't be able to keep up with us, so that's a good protection against. They find the British 105 gun, so it's a tremendous very high. Now the Leopard really replaced the Centurion in a lot of countries' armouries around the world. After World War II, a lot of the Commonwealth countries bought Centurion tanks from Britain. A lot of non-Commonwealth countries came and bought the Centurion. When they got rid of their Centurion tanks, on the whole, they tended to buy Leopard tanks as replacement. And in many ways, the Leopard has now become, for many, the European main battle tank. And it's gone through quite a number of marks. This particular Leopard that you'll see driving now, this was actually used by the Canadian Army, and some years ago the Canadians got to the point where they thought tanks were old hat, they were going to get rid of them, and we put up our hands and said, we possibly have a couple of years the service, and very kindly gave us 2 Leopard tanks. Brought them over here, then the Canadian Army went off to fight in Afghanistan, and decided tanks were still important, and they ended up buying more Leopard tanks, upgrading them, putting them back into service, and thankfully they didn't actually ask for the 2 they gave us back. But it was a good example for us to show the mobility and the utility of tanks still to this day, even in countries like Afghanistan. So that was what the Germans built after World War II. Now we're going to bring on for you now the tank that I imagine you're waiting for. This one is the Tiger tank from the Second World War. Now as I mentioned earlier, the Tiger was pushed on the German army really by Hitler. He wanted the German army to have something much bigger than anybody else, much more powerful, with a very heavy gun. He insisted they took that massive 88mm gun that is used around the aircraft gun, put it in the tank, very thick armour plate, 10cm thick at the front of the tank there, and you end up with this very impressively armour-plated, very powerful gun, but a very expensive tank. Now, those of you who have had a chance to talk to any of the crew, you can do so afterwards, they will tell you how complex this tank is. It's not only made, but also maintained to keep it going. And because of that, during the war, the Germans were put that up against probably about 6,000 50,000 German tanks. There are an awful lot of them around, so it was undoubtedly a very, very powerful tank, but in the actual battlefield of World War II, very few of them appear in combat because they just can't make enough of them. Now the Tiger's got a crew of 5 inside there. At the moment, with the drivers down in the front as you're facing the vehicle. He's on the left-hand side, the right-hand side. The bow machine gunner, the radio operators on the left-hand side. Commander, gunner, loader all in the turret. All those wheels to spread out the weight of such a big heavy tank, well over 50 tons. And the engine in the back, the famous Maybach engine that's powering this tank along, really designed in the first place for a tank slightly lighter, a 36-ton tank, and a cause of endless troubles not only to the crew in World War II, but subsequently. But the truth is, most tank engines on most variants of tanks cause trouble. It's not just with the Tiger. military museum in early 1943. It was the first complete tiger captured by the British forces, by all the Allied Western forces, and it was seen by Churchill in Tunis, by the King went out there and took a look at it as well. It was brought back to Britain for evaluation, and it came down to the Tank Museum in 1951, and it's been the subject of an ongoing restoration project really for over the last 10 years. We've just done some more work on the tank. We've fitted something called a fan drive in the back so that we can now authentically turn the fans to keep the engine cool from the engine. And we've just got to say a big thank you to an awful lot of people who've helped us carry on the restoration work on this tank: the Lottery Fund, the Prison Fund, the Wheel Foundation, and probably some of you private individuals here have given us Bibles, tenors, all sorts of money to keep the vehicle going. So we're very pleased and thank you for helping support us in keeping this fantastic bit of history mobile and working. Now what we're going to do for you now, we're going to park the tank there for a few minutes, and in about 10 minutes time we're going to start it up again and drive it off the arena and take it up and put it back inside the museum so that you can go and have a closer look at it. And do please, if you've got the opportunity, talk to the crew, talk to some of the chaps who have been helping us, working on the vehicle, that are the engineers that are going to be down there so they can tell you how complex a vehicle it is. But do please, as I mentioned earlier, do keep out of the way of the vehicle when it's driving up the road. Keep an eye on the dogs and the children so they don't go running out as well. And when these vehicles are parked up, do remember the exhausts are very hot behind them. We'll have stuff there warning you about it, but do remember they're very, very hot items there. Now inside the museum, for the rest of the afternoon, there's been plenty of other activities. There's talk, show and tell. The rest of the museum there for you to go and have a look at. So do please carry on and enjoy your day, and thank you very much for coming along to the Tank Museum today on our nice, not quite so sunny, tidy day. Thank you.